The man they would later call a liar, a vagrant, and a threat to the pristine order of the federal embassy was, at that precise moment, simply a man doing his job. His name was Elias Vance, and his job was sanitation. He moved through the world with a quiet economy of motion, a man who had learned long ago that the best way to observe was to go unnoticed. His uniform, a simple gray jumpsuit, was immaculate but worn thin at the knees and elbows, a testament to years of diligent, uncelebrated labor. He was of an age that was hard to place. His face was a roadmap of deep lines etched by sun and time, but his eyes, a pale and piercing blue, held a clarity that was unnervingly young. They missed nothing. The embassy lobby was a cathedral of power, designed to awe and intimidate. Its floors were polished Italian marble so black and reflective they seemed to hold a captive, upside-down sky. Sunlight, filtered through colossal panes of armored glass, fell in solemn, monolithic shafts, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny, forgotten souls. The air itself felt curated, smelling of expensive leather, industrial-grade cleaning solvents, and the faint metallic tang of constant surveillance. Towering flags stood in silent, colorful judgment, their fabric so stiff with importance they barely stirred in the currents of the sophisticated climate control system. It was a place of hushed whispers and heavy footsteps, a world away from the grit and noise of the city outside. To Elias, it was just another stop on his route, a collection of receptacles for the day's refuse. Marcus Thorne, Deputy Chief of Diplomatic Security, stood near the Central Information Desk, a man perfectly matched to his environment. His suit was a razor-sharp charcoal gray, his shoes gleamed with a ferocious polish, and his hair was sculpted into a helmet of professional ambition. He saw the world as a series of tiers, and he occupied a very high one. From his vantage point, Elias Vance was not a man. He was a function, a necessary but distasteful part of the building's ecosystem, like the plumbing or the wiring. Thorne watched Elias wheel his cart of supplies and empty bins across the vast floor, his lip curling ever so slightly in distaste. The squeak of the cart's rubber wheels was an affront to the lobby's sacred quiet. Thorne made a mental note to complain to the sanitation contractor. Again. Elias worked, oblivious to the disdain. He was listening. He was always listening. It was a habit forged in places far more dangerous than this sterile hall of power. To him, the world was a constant broadcast of information, and silence was merely the space between transmissions. As he bent to replace the liner in a chrome wastebasket near a secluded alcove, two men sat down on a nearby leather bench. They were dressed in expensive but ill-fitting suits, their posture stiff and unnatural. They spoke to each other in low, guttural tones, confident in their obscurity. But to Elias, their words were as clear as a bell ringing in an empty church. They were speaking in a specific and rare dialect of Avar, a language spoken in the mountains of Dagestan. It was a language of harsh consonants and clipped vowels, a language Elias had not heard in over 20 years. He had learned it on his back in a dusty, sun-baked courtyard from a dying warlord who had traded secrets for sips of precious water. The memory was a scar, but the knowledge it left was a tool. He continued his work, his movements slow and deliberate, his body angled away from the men, a perfect portrait of a laborer lost in his mundane task. But his ears, his mind, were on fire. He caught fragments first. The shipment is secure. Then, more clearly, a reference to a gardener who would be waiting by the Southern Roses at noon. It sounded like common code, the sort of thing any low-level intelligence analyst would flag. But then came the phrase that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. One of the men, the larger of the two, leaned in and whispered a line of what sounded like poetry, a local proverb. "When the mountain weeps iron, the valley will drown in red." It was not a common saying. It was a kill-switch phrase, A final activation code he had last heard whispered into a crackling radio just before a marketplace in a forgotten corner of the world had vanished in a cloud of fire and smoke. Elias finished with the bin, his hand steady, his expression unchanged. He pushed his cart away from the alcove, the squeaking of the wheels now a frantic, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic pounding of his own heart. He knew, with a certainty that was absolute and terrifying, that something catastrophic was about to happen to this building. He looked at the flags, the marble, the oblivious staff going about their important business. They were all standing in a tomb and did not know it. He had to tell someone. He changed course, leaving his cart by a pillar, and walked directly toward the main security desk, a small, gray man on a collision course with a wall of disbelief. He approached the desk, a fortress of mahogany and brushed steel. A young guard with a bored expression looked up, his hand resting near his sidearm. Before Elias could speak, a sharp, imperious voice cut through the air like a shard of glass. "Can I help you?" Marcus Thorne had materialized beside the desk, his arms crossed, his body positioned as a barrier. He did not look at Elias. He looked past him, as if addressing a mildly annoying smell. "I need to speak with the head of security," Elias said. His voice was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of the deference Thorne expected. "It is a matter of urgent importance." Thorne's eyes finally settled on Elias, and they narrowed with contempt. He took in the worn uniform, the calloused hands, the smudge of dust on his cheek. The head of security is a very busy man. He doesn't have time to discuss the state of the trash cans. If you have a complaint, file it with your supervisor. He turned to the guard. "See that he returns to his duties." "This isn't about my duties," Elias insisted, his voice remaining level, a stone of placid certainty in a river of Thorne's arrogance. "I overheard a conversation, a threat against this embassy." A flicker of something, not concern but amusement, danced in Thorne's eyes. He let out a short, derisive laugh that was loud enough to turn a few heads in the cavernous lobby. "A threat? You?" He gestured dismissively at Elias's uniform. "And what, precisely, did you overhear with your highly trained garbage-collecting ears? A plot to replace the toilet paper with a cheaper single-ply?" The young guard snickered. A few administrative staff members nearby paused their work, sensing a spectacle. The public humiliation had begun. Elias felt the familiar heat of being underestimated, of being dismissed. It was an old coat he had worn many times before. He did not let it warm him with anger. "The men were speaking of Var," Elias stated, the name of the language falling into the polished space with quiet weight. A northern dialect, they spoke of a shipment, a meeting at noon, and an activation phrase. Thorne's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. The specificity of the language was unexpected. But his ego, a vast and well-fortified structure, quickly reasserted itself. He saw it not as a genuine warning, but as a pathetic attempt by a nobody to feel important. "Avar? How utterly fascinating!" The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to taste. "And I suppose you're a world-renowned linguist in your spare time, when you're not elbow-deep in other people's filth." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried through the lobby. "Listen to me very carefully. You are a sanitation worker. Your job is to be invisible. You are not to engage with visitors. You are certainly not to invent fantasies to bother my staff. Now, get back to your cart and push it out of my sight." The phrase was, "When the mountain weeps iron, the valley will drown in red," Elias said, his voice as calm as a deep lake. He offered the words as a key, a piece of irrefutable proof. He watched Thorne's face, hoping to see a spark of recognition, a professional instinct that could override the personal prejudice. He saw nothing. Thorne's face hardened into a mask of pure fury. The persistence was an insult. The calm defiance was an act of insubordination against the natural order of his world. This janitor, this ghost, was refusing to disappear. "That's it. You're done." Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. He snapped his fingers at the guard. "I want him out. Not just out of the lobby, out of the building. Escort him to the property line and inform his company that their services are no longer required here. His contract is terminated, effective immediately." The young guard, now looking uneasy, stepped forward. "Sir, maybe we should just—" "Did you hear me, officer?" Thorne barked, his authority now fully and venomously engaged. "This man is a security risk. He's loitering, harassing staff, and spouting gibberish. For all we know, he's the threat. Get him out of here now, or I'll have your badge for insubordination." The guard flinched and complied. He took Elias's arm, his grip surprisingly gentle, almost apologetic. Elias did not resist. He had presented the data. He had delivered the warning. The system had rejected it. As the guard led him toward the grand glass doors, Thorne delivered his parting shot, his voice ringing with triumph through the silent lobby. "And make sure he doesn't take any of the silver with him." A few sycophantic chuckles echoed in his wake. Elias was walked past the flags across the marble and pushed gently out into the noisy, sun-drenched chaos of the city. The doors hissed shut behind him, sealing him out of the world he had just tried to save. He felt a profound weariness settle into his bones, a sorrow deeper than anger. It was not the insult that pained him. It was the knowledge of the price of such deafness. He had seen valleys drown in red before. Across the street from the embassy, a small park with a handful of weathered benches offered a clear view of the building's imposing facade. Elias sat down, his posture betraying none of the turmoil within. To any passer-by, he was just a worker on his break, enjoying the midday sun. But his gaze was fixed on the embassy, a hawk watching a nest of oblivious birds. He would not leave. He could not. Duty was not a uniform he could take off. It was woven into the very fiber of his being. He felt the pull of memory, a ghost tide dragging him back decades to a place of dust and heat. He was young then, barely 20, a soldier with an uncanny gift for languages. They had sent him to a special unit, a place where words were weapons and a misplaced accent could get you killed. His mentor was a man named Croft, a grizzled legend who spoke a dozen languages and saw the world not as a map of nations, but as a tapestry of dialects. "Everyone has a voice, Elias," Croft had told him, his own voice a gravelly whisper. "Most people just shout. Your job is to listen for the whispers. That's where the truth lives." The memory shifted. He was in a mud-brick room, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear. A captured insurgent leader sat across from him, silent and defiant for 3 days. The other interrogators had used force, threats, intimidation. They had gotten nothing. Elias had entered the room with a pot of tea and a bowl of dates. He had sat in silence for an hour, and then he had spoken, not in the man's primary language but in the nearly extinct dialect of his grandmother's village, a tongue of lullabies and folk tales. He had recited a line from a children's poem about a thirsty goat. The man's eyes, hard as obsidian, had filled with tears. And then he had talked. He had talked for 6 hours, and the information he gave had prevented an attack that would have killed over 400 civilians, including dozens of children at a school. Elias had not felt triumph, only a hollow ache. He had used a man's soul against him. He closed his eyes, the Washington sun on his face, but all he could feel was the phantom heat of a Kandahar afternoon. He had retired from that life, sought anonymity in the simple, honest work of cleaning up after others. He had wanted to live in a world where words were just words, not triggers for bombs or keys to unlock human misery. But the world, it seemed, had other plans. The whispers had found him again. Inside the embassy, Sarah Jenkins sat at her desk in a cubicle just off the main lobby, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a junior administrative assistant, a glorified clerk, and her primary function was to be as unobtrusive as the ficus plant in the corner. She had witnessed the entire, horrifying exchange between Marcus Thorne and the sanitation worker. Thorne's cruelty had been sickening, but it was the old man's face that haunted her. the calm, the absolute, unshakable certainty in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a madman, it was the look of a prophet. Sarah had a degree in linguistics, a fact she had learned to keep to herself in this environment of political science and international relations majors. It was considered a soft skill. But she knew what Avar was. She knew how rare it was and how specific a northern dialect was. It wasn't something a person just made up. And the phrase he had quoted, it had a chilling poetic cadence. When the mountain weeps iron, it sounded like something from a textbook on extremist rhetoric. Thorne strode past her cubicle, preening. He was accepting quiet congratulations from a few colleagues. "You handled that well, Marcus," one said. "Can't have that sort of riffraff wandering in off the street." Thorne puffed out his chest. "It's about maintaining standards. The moment you let the standards slip, you invite chaos." Sarah felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar. Rage. Chaos wasn't an old man with a warning. Chaos was a building full of people who were about to die because of one man's colossal ego. She wrestled with her conscience. To do nothing was safe. She could keep her job, her security clearance, her quiet, unremarkable life. To do something was to risk everything. She would be challenging a superior, a man known for his vindictive nature. She could be fired, blacklisted. She looked through the glass partition toward the lobby. She saw Thorne laughing, his head thrown back. Then she looked out the massive front windows across the street to the park. She saw the old man, sitting on the bench, watching. Still there, still on guard. That single image decided it for her. He hadn't given up. How could she? Her hands trembled as she turned to her computer. She typed in a query on the secure internal network. Threat reporting, non-conventional source. The official protocol was clear. Report any and all suspicions to her immediate superior. That was Thorne. It was a dead end. But Sarah was smart. She dug deeper into the archived protocols, the dusty digital corners of the security manual. And there she found it. Protocol 17 Delta. A contingency measure for situations where the immediate chain of command might be compromised or unresponsive. It listed a single direct contact number. A line to a department she had never heard of. The Office of Strategic Liaison. It was a ghost number, a relic of the Cold War, meant for the most dire of emergencies. Using it without justification was a career-ending mistake. She stared at the number on her screen. Her breath hitched. She thought of the old man's calm, certain eyes. She thought of the valley drowning in red. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she picked up her desk phone, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She shielded the keypad with her body and slowly, deliberately, punched in the numbers. She was risking her entire future on the word of a man she didn't know, a man who had just been thrown out like trash. The phone did not ring. The line simply clicked open, and a voice, cold and flat as frozen steel, said, "Speak." There was no greeting, no identification. Sarah's own voice was a reedy whisper. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a junior assistant at the Federal Embassy. I need to report a threat." "Your superior is Marcus Thorne," the voice stated. It wasn't a question. They knew who she was, where she was calling from. The knowledge was terrifying. "Report to him." "I can't," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "He's the one. He's the reason I'm calling. He dismissed the source." There was a pause, a millisecond of digital silence that felt like an eternity. "Describe the source." "A sanitation worker," she said, and she cringed, hearing how insane it sounded. "An older gentleman. He said he overheard two men speaking a northern dialect of Avar. He said they used a code phrase." "What was the name of the sanitation worker?" the voice asked, the tone unchanged, still utterly flat. I think I heard Mr. Thorne call him Vance. Elias Vance." The silence that followed this time was different. It was not digital. It was human. It was the sound of a mind processing information of immense and shocking gravity. The cold, flat quality of the voice on the other end vanished, replaced by an intensity that was far more frightening. It was the sound of a sleeping dragon stirring in its lair. "Miss Jenkins," the voice said, and it was now sharp, focused, a weapon being aimed. "Listen to me very carefully. Where is Mr. Vance right now?" He's across the street, in the park. Mr. Thorne fired him and had him thrown out." "Can you see him from your position?" Sarah craned her neck. "Yes, he's on a bench, facing the embassy. Keep your eyes on him. Do not let him out of your sight. Do not approach him. Do not speak to anyone about this call. A team is being dispatched to your location. Authorization code is Crimson Spire. Repeat it back to me." "Crimson Spire," she whispered, the words feeling alien on her tongue. "Good. Help is on the way, Miss Jenkins. You did the right thing." The line went dead. Sarah slowly lowered the receiver into its cradle. Her entire body was shaking, not from fear, but from the dawning realization that she had just pulled a pin on a grenade of unimaginable size. She looked out the window again at the quiet old man on the bench. Who was he? What had she just done? 30 miles away, in a soundproofed subterranean facility deep beneath the manicured lawns of Fort Meade, General Ivan Madsen stood up from his desk. He was a man carved from granite and hard choices, the commander of the military's most clandestine intelligence unit. The flat, cold voice Sarah had heard belonged to his top aide, but the decision had been his. The name Elias Vance had struck him like a physical blow. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in 10 years. He had presumed, had hoped, that Vance had found the peace he so richly deserved. Madsen strode from his office into the humming nerve center of his command. Maps glowed on glass walls, and analysts with haunted eyes monitored the world's secret conversations. "I want a security detail," Madsen announced, his voice cutting through the low hum of the operations floor. "Full tactical response. Destination, the Federal Embassy, downtown. I want a complete communications blackout around the target area, effective in 10 minutes, and get me Ambassador Sterling on a secure line. Tell him his embassy is compromised." His aide rushed to keep pace. "Sir, what is the nature of the threat?" Madsen paused, his hand on the door, and looked back at his team. His face was grim. "The Oracle of Kandahar is sitting on a park bench across the street, and, from what I've been told, he's not happy." The name meant nothing to most of the young analysts, but a few of the older hands looked up from their consoles, their faces paling. The Oracle. It was a name from the deepest, darkest chapters of the agency's history. A legend. A ghost. Within minutes, the mobilization was a symphony of controlled chaos. 3 black, armored sport utility vehicles, indistinguishable from the hundreds of other government vehicles that prowled the streets of Washington, peeled out of a hidden garage, their engines rumbling with suppressed power. Inside, 8 men, all dressed in discreet tactical gear beneath their dark suits, sat in disciplined silence. They were members of a special mission unit, the sharpest tool in Madsen's arsenal. They did not know the mission's objective, only that when the general himself rode with them, the fate of nations was often in the balance. General Madsen sat in the lead vehicle, his dress uniform heavy with medals, encased in a garment bag on the seat beside him. He would be making a statement today, and appearances would matter. He stared out the tinted window at the blur of the city, his thoughts on Elias Vance. He had been the one to sign Vance's discharge papers, to grant him the anonymity he had begged for. He had promised the man his war was over. It was a promise he was about to break. Back in the embassy lobby, Marcus Thorne was enjoying the peak of his day. The incident with the janitor had elevated his status. He was the man who had protected the embassy from an unpleasant distraction. He was regaling the ambassador's chief of staff with a polished and embellished version of the story when the first sign of the coming storm appeared. The cell phones of everyone in the lobby died simultaneously. A moment later, the Wi-Fi winked out of existence. An uneasy murmur rippled through the room. Thorne immediately moved to take charge. "It's likely a minor technical issue," he announced, his voice projecting an authority he didn't feel. "Security is looking into it." But his own radio was silent. A dead weight on his belt. A cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. Then came the arrival. The main entrance doors did not slide open. They were pulled open with such force that they slammed against their stoppers, the sound echoing through the lobby like a gunshot. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to stare. Framed in the doorway stood two men in dark suits, their posture radiating a level of disciplined menace that made the embassy's own security guards look like mall cops. They stepped inside and took up positions on either side of the entrance, their eyes scanning, missing nothing. Behind them, more men entered, moving with a fluid, predatory grace, creating a cordon that sealed the lobby from the outside world. And then, through the human channel they had created, General Ivan Madsen entered. He had put on his uniform. It was the full formal attire of a four-star general in the United States Army, a constellation of medals and ribbons adorning his chest. Each step of his polished boots on the marble floor was a sharp, percussive report, a drumbeat of impending judgment. The air in the lobby became thick, heavy, impossible to breathe. Power, real and absolute, had just walked into the room, and it made Marcus Thorne's petty authority seem like a child's game. Thorne, his face a mixture of confusion and panic, rushed forward. "General Madsen, this is an unexpected honor. I am Marcus Thorne, Deputy Chief of Security. To what do we owe the—" His voice trailed off as Madsen's eyes, cold as a winter sky, swept over him and dismissed him as if he were a piece of furniture. The general's gaze continued to scan the room, searching. Sarah Jenkins, who had been frozen at her desk, saw her moment. She had received a quiet instruction through a security guard who had been given the authorization code. She had brought Elias Vance back inside just moments before the lockdown. He was standing near a pillar, as quiet and unassuming as ever, the calm eye of the hurricane that was now raging around him. Madsen's eyes found him. The entire intimidating posture of the general shifted. The hardness in his face softened into something else. Deep, profound respect. He ignored the dumbfounded Thorne, ignored the gawking crowd, and walked a direct, unwavering line across the marble floor to the old man in the sanitation uniform. He stopped precisely 1 foot in front of Elias. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them that spanned a decade of peace and a lifetime of war. Then General Madsen, one of the most powerful military men in the world, brought his heels together with a sharp crack. He raised his hand to his brow in a salute so crisp, so perfect, it seemed to vibrate in the silent air. "Mr. Vance," Madsen's voice rang out, clear and strong, filling every corner of the vast lobby. "It is an honor to see you again, sir." The collective gasp of the onlookers was audible. Marcus Thorne looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open, his face slack with utter disbelief. He took a half-step forward, his brain struggling to process the scene. "General, I don't understand. This man is... He's a janitor. I had him removed for causing a disturbance." Madsen lowered his salute but did not take his eyes off Elias. "You had him removed?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He finally turned his head, and the full Arctic force of his gaze fell upon Marcus Thorne. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You are Marcus Thorne?" Yes, sir, General," Thorne stammered. "Mr. Thorne," Madsen began, his voice now a low, lethal hum. "This janitor, as you call him, is Elias Vance. For 15 years, he was the lead interrogator for the Joint Special Operations Command's most elite task force. He is fluent in 12 languages and more than 30 dialects, some of which are so rare that he is one of only a handful of non-native speakers on the planet. His official designation, a name whispered with reverence by our allies and with terror by our enemies, was the Oracle." This man, with his garbage-collecting ears, once deciphered a 3-word coded message hidden in a live hostage broadcast and averted the detonation of a dirty bomb in a European capital. His work has saved, by conservative estimates, over 2,000 lives, both civilian and military. Madsen took a step toward Thorne, who involuntarily shrank back. He retired 10 years ago, seeking a life of peace and anonymity that he had more than earned. He chose a job where he could be invisible, where he would not be asked to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore. And today, when he tried to do his duty one more time, when he tried to hand you a warning that could save the life of every single person in this building, you called him a liar. You mocked him. You had him thrown into the street like garbage. Madsen's voice rose, each word a hammer blow of condemnation. The phrase he reported to you, the one you dismissed as gibberish. When the mountain weeps iron, the valley will drown in red. It's the final arming code for a new generation of thermobaric explosive, an iron oxide-based compound. We've been hunting the cell that uses it for 6 months. They specialize in high-profile targets, places like this. The gardener is their trigger man. The Southern Roses refers to the botanical gardens just south of here, which has a clear line of sight to this building's primary ventilation intake. At noon, in approximately 7 minutes, that trigger man is set to receive a signal to fire a rocket-propelled grenade containing that compound into the vents, which would have incinerated this entire building from the inside out. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was a screaming, terrified void. People looked at the ventilation grates, at the clock on the wall, their faces etched with horror. Thorne's face had gone from crimson to a pasty, sickly white. A sheen of sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked at Elias, at the quiet old man who stood, his expression not of triumph, but of deep, weary sorrow. "Your ego, Mr. Thorne," Madsen said, his voice dropping to a final, damning whisper. "Your pathetic, preening arrogance nearly got every one of us killed. You are not a protector of this embassy. You are its single greatest vulnerability." He gestured to 2 of his men. "Place Mr. Thorne under arrest. Charges are dereliction of duty, obstruction of a federal agent in the commission of his duties, and reckless endangerment on a scale that borders on treason. Get him out of my sight." The 2 tactical officers moved in. They did not touch Thorne with aggression, but with a chilling, impersonal efficiency. They took him by the arms, stripped him of his security badge and sidearm, and cuffed his hands behind his back. Thorne did not resist. He was a broken man, a hollowed-out shell of arrogance. As he was led away, his eyes met Elias's for a fleeting second. He saw no gloating, no, "I told you so." He saw only a profound disappointment which was, somehow, infinitely worse. With Thorne gone, Madsen turned his full attention back to Elias. The general's entire demeanor softened. "Elias," he said, his voice now filled with genuine concern, "I am sorry. I'm sorry you were dragged back into this. I'm sorry you were treated with such disrespect." Elias gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "The uniform shouldn't matter, Ivan," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "The words. That's all that should matter." He then looked at the general. "The trigger man is still out there. You have a team moving on the botanical gardens?" "They've been in position for 5 minutes," Madsen confirmed, "waiting for your positive identification of the 2 men you saw here." He pointed toward a tablet one of his aides was holding. "The lobby's security footage." Elias walked over to the tablet. He watched the footage, his eyes sharp and focused. He pointed. "That's them." A moment later, Madsen spoke into his wrist communicator. "Target is confirmed. Execute." A wave of relief washed over the lobby. The immediate threat was being neutralized. Charges against Thorne were being drawn up. The embassy was secure. The crisis was over, but the fallout was just beginning. In the aftermath, Ambassador Sterling, a man whose face was a mask of controlled fury and deep embarrassment, personally escorted Elias to his private office. There, over coffee served in delicate porcelain cups, Elias quietly and precisely recounted the entire conversation he had overheard, providing a level of linguistic and cultural nuance that no simple translation could ever capture. He explained how the dialect they used was specific to a mountain region known for its fierce independence and bomb-making skills. He analyzed their word choices, their body language, their cadence. He wasn't just translating words, he was interpreting a threat in its full, three-dimensional context. As Elias spoke, a new protocol was already being drafted in the highest echelons of the State Department and the intelligence community. It would be informally known as the Vance Protocol. It was a complete overhaul of how civilian-sourced intelligence was handled at every embassy and consulate across the globe. It mandated that any threat, regardless of the source's perceived status or position, be escalated immediately to a dedicated intelligence officer. The training modules included a detailed case study of the incident, with Marcus Thorne's name and photograph used as the primary example of catastrophic failure due to hubris. His name became a verb in intelligence circles. To Thorne, a source was to arrogantly dismiss a vital piece of information. Sarah Jenkins was summoned to the ambassador's office after Elias had finished his debriefing. She entered, terrified, expecting a reprimand for bypassing the chain of command. Instead, she found herself facing General Madsen and the ambassador, both of whom stood up when she entered the room. "Miss Jenkins," the ambassador began, his voice filled with sincere gratitude, "your courage and integrity today were exemplary. You trusted your instincts and risked your career to do the right thing. We are in your debt." General Madsen chimed in. "The intelligence community needs more people like you, Miss Jenkins, people who can see the person, not the uniform." 2 weeks later, she was offered a position as a junior analyst at the Office of Strategic Liaison, the very department she had called. It was the beginning of a long and distinguished career. Marcus Thorne's fall was as swift as it was brutal. He was publicly disgraced. At his court-martial, his defense was that he was following procedure, that Elias Vance's story was unbelievable. The prosecution simply played the security footage of the incident, followed by a recorded deposition from General Madsen detailing Elias's legendary career. The contrast between Thorne's sneering arrogance and Elias's quiet dignity was damning. He was found guilty on all counts. He was dishonorably discharged, stripped of his pension, and sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary. The news sent a shockwave through the diplomatic corps, a clear message that ego was a luxury the nation could no longer afford in its public servants. Elias Vance, meanwhile, wanted none of the accolades. He politely declined offers of a consultancy position, a medal, and a generous pension. All he asked for was to have his old job back. He wanted his route, his cart, his quiet, invisible life. Reluctantly, the government agreed. He returned to his work the following week, the same gray uniform, the same slow, methodical movements. But something had changed. The security guards at the embassy now snapped to attention when he entered the building. The administrative staff, including Sarah Jenkins before her transfer, would greet him with quiet, respectful nods. He was no longer invisible. He was a guardian, a silent protector hiding in plain sight. 1 year passed, then another. The city moved on, the incident at the embassy fading into a nearly forgotten memory for most. Elias continued his work, the rhythm of his days a comforting balm. The whispers he heard were now just the mundane conversations of the city, the harmless chatter of tourists and office workers. He found peace in their meaninglessness. One crisp autumn morning, as Elias was sweeping leaves from the sidewalk in the park across from the embassy, a man approached him. He was thinner than Elias remembered, his hair now streaked with gray. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a simple, ill-fitting jacket and worn trousers. It was Marcus Thorne. He had been released from prison early for good behavior. Elias stopped sweeping and leaned on his broom, his expression unreadable. He waited. Thorne stood before him, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the pavement. He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "Mr. Vance," he began, his voice rough, unused to public speaking without a shield of authority. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I did was unforgivable. My arrogance. It cost me everything. My career, my reputation, my freedom. But it wasn't until I was sitting in a cell with nothing but time to think that I realized what it almost cost everyone else. I came here today to say that I am sorry. For my words, for my actions, for my blindness. I am truly, profoundly sorry." Elias listened, his pale blue eyes studying the man before him. He saw the truth of the apology in the man's broken posture, in the tremor in his voice. He saw a man who had been stripped bare of his ego and was only now beginning to understand what it meant to be human. After a long silence, Elias spoke, his voice the same calm, quiet tone it had always been. "Apologies are words, Mr. Thorne. They are for the past. What matters is what you do now, what you do with the time you have left." Thorne looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I don't know what to do. No one will hire me. I have nothing." "You have a voice," Elias said simply. "You have a story. Go tell it. Go to the academies. Go to the training centers. Teach the young ones what you learned. Teach them to listen. Teach them that a person's worth is not measured by the clothes they wear or the title they hold. Teach them to see the person, not the uniform. Turn the worst day of your life into the most important lesson of theirs. Don't waste your failure." Tears welled in Marcus Thorne's eyes. He nodded, unable to speak. He had come seeking forgiveness, a way to assuage his own guilt. Instead, Elias Vance had given him something far more valuable, a purpose, a path to redemption. Thorne turned and walked away, not a broken man anymore, but a man with a mission. Elias watched him go. He then resumed his sweeping, the rhythmic scratch of the bristles on the concrete, a steady, peaceful sound in the morning air. His war was finally over. He was just a man doing his job, a quiet guardian of a world that, for the most part, never even knew he was there. And that was exactly the way he wanted it. Occasionally, a black, unmarked car would pull up to the curb on his route. General Madsen would step out, and the two old soldiers would talk for a few minutes, sharing a coffee from a thermos. They would speak of old times, of new threats, of the changing world. Then the general would leave, and Elias would return to his work, a living legend disguised as a janitor, a master of words who had found his ultimate peace in a life of quiet, humble service.